5 a.m. in New York City. Good morning, I'm Bonnie Quinn with your Bloomberg Brief. Here's what you need to know. Stock futures show a bounce back after the S&P 500 suffered its biggest decline since April Friday. This as the White House tempers trade threats against China. And President Trump is in Israel as Hamas releases the 20 remaining living war hostages. The president about to address the Knesset with those hostages now on Israeli soil. And we'll bring that speech to you, but first let's take a look at where markets are standing this Monday morning after that volatility pothole, as Amy Wu Silverman would call it, Friday. We have a big bounce back on our hands, assuming that continues throughout the session. Let's take a look at some other asset classes. Obviously, the bond market is closed today for the holiday, but we dropped 10 basis points across the yield curve on Friday. We started with the 10-year at 4.13. We closed the session with the 10-year at 4.03. We also had a huge round trip for the likes of Bitcoin. And we're seeing gold today back above $4,000 an ounce. Silver also potentially a short squeeze in London. That's up 85% this year. Obviously, a lot going on. Bill Blaine says get your hard hats out because this may not be the first time we see market action like this between now and the end of the year. But maybe earnings will save us. We start with the banks tomorrow. Let's get to some individual stock movers now. We'll go across to London and Valerie Teitel. Valerie.
Good morning, Ivani. Let's start with a check on these rare earth miners. The American-listed miners are doing very well in pre-market trade. USA Rare Earths up over 20%. Same for critical metals, and MP Materials not far behind, up over 10%. Now, this can be one of two things, Vani. Either the market is assuming that China is not going to pull back any of its export restrictions on rare earths, or perhaps the market is just thinking that now that China has raised the stakes, that perhaps the U.S. government would act more quickly and more decisively on taking equity stakes in these miners. Let's also add tech stocks to what's rebounding today. NVIDIA leading the gains in the Mag 7 so far this morning, up 3.7% as investors look to buy the dip in tech stocks this morning. NVIDIA was down near 5% on Friday, so we are erasing a lot of Friday's decline with this pre-market move so far. Lastly, let's end on StubHub. This is the ticket resale platform that went public back in September. It's been initiated by a number of Wall Street banks, Goldman, JP Morgan, Evercore, even BMO, all initiating coverage of this stock this morning. All of them are bullish. The stock is up near 4%, up 3.7% so far in trade. Analysts are quite bullish on the prospects of them entering the primary ticket sale market. Bonnie?
Valerie, thank you so much. Valerie Teitel there. And later in the hour, Jordan Rochester of Mizuho Bank will be joining us. Hamas has freed all remaining living Israeli hostages being held in the Gaza Strip. President Trump is scheduled to address Israel's Knesset in just moments. Let's go live now to Bloomberg's Oliver Crook in Jerusalem, overlooking the Old Town. What do we know that President Trump will say to the Israeli Knesset today, Ollie?
I think that he will really sort of affirm the message that he's had really since he was inaugurated as president of the United States, which is a message of strong friendship and support for the Israelis. And that is a message that, has been sent by many American presidents, but has been matched in many ways by unparalleled action by President Trump in a way that I don't think we've seen really from many American presidents in the past. And that is at least the Israeli view on things. I mean, you look at basically the genesis of how we got to this point. This is something that was really entirely brokered by the Trump administration. Something that would have been thought pretty impossible even as recently as 2 weeks ago, and really has come into being where now, as of this moment now, Hamas has no longer any custody of any living hostages for the Israelis. This has been the day that the Israelis have been waiting for more than 2 years now. From the Palestinian side within the Gaza Strip, it is the first time in many, many months that there have been nights without gunfire, without explosions. That has begun on Friday, and is from the Israeli perspective. I mean, just arriving within Tel Aviv as I landed a couple of days ago, you can see skyscrapers, one of them illuminated with the Israeli flag, with the American flag. Underneath it, it says, "Thank you." And the road that President Trump just traveled from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem is a road that is lined with Israeli flags. Every third flag today, and since Friday, is an American flag. And that is really the kind of reception that Donald Trump will be receiving by the people of Israel within the Knesset, where he's expected to speak within the next few minutes. This is really the last time, the first time, or the third time, I think, in history an American president has spoken before the Knesset. And I believe it's the last time we've had a president doing a sitting president since 2008, when it was George W. W. Bush. So really a significant moment, really to mark what is at least the end of a certain phase of this war. Whether or not is the end of the war entirely is a much bigger question, and one to which you have different answers when you ask President Donald Trump, when you ask Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and when you ask the Israeli public.
Ollie, you mentioned the signs of celebration. We saw massive scenes in Hostages Square and all over Tel Aviv of celebrations and a lot of tears. You're in Jerusalem, it's a lot more ethnically diverse in many ways. What are, the people doing there? Is there celebrations going on? Is there a lot of chatter about what's going to happen when the Palestinian prisoners are going to be released?
I think that on the public display, it's a much more sort of sober environment. That being said, I think that the feeling in Israel is universal right now, which is one of jubilation, one of extreme optimism, and one of optimism that you have not heard in a very, very long time in Israel. And as you say, in Jerusalem, remember 1/5 of the Israeli population is also Arab, passport holders of Israel. And so it's a very obviously complicated situation. I do think that this jubilation, though, Vani, and this is a point that I think we will be sort of more and more coming into contact with as the days and weeks progress, is it sort of masks the bitter complexity that still remains in resolving so many of the issues, right? We have a day today where everyone can be happy, everyone can celebrate, but it does not answer so many of the questions that are still ahead of us in terms of getting to the eventual road, not just to sort of Palestinian statehood, but a road to a secure Gaza Strip, a road to a sort of technocratic governance structure that is envisioned by the 20-point plan. And I think the next question for everybody is going to be what comes next for Hamas. As you know, the Israeli goal, there have been two goals in trying to end this war. One is the return of the hostages. The other one is the destruction or disarmament of Hamas. Goal 2 has not been achieved. So as a consequence, Trump says the war is over. Netanyahu says not so much, and that will be the question for us for the coming weeks and months.
Absolutely. Ollie, thank you so much. Ollie is going to stick with us throughout the morning. That is Oliver Crook there in Jerusalem. Let's now get the view from Arab leaders. Bloomberg Horizons anchor Jumana Bersechi joins us now from Dubai. Jumana, we know there's a summit obviously taking place in Egypt also today, but what do we know from the region, other types of reactions?
Well, Vani, I think the fact that this summit is actually taking place in Egypt and Sharm el-Sheikh just underscores the involvement of Arab leaders in bringing about this outcome. Oliver was just talking about the hero's welcome that President Trump is receiving in Israel. He's also expected to receive a hero's welcome once he lands in Egypt in a couple of hours' time. Earlier this morning, the Egyptian president, Sisi, announced that he's going to be awarding Trump with their highest Medal of Honor, that is Order of the Nile, in a recognition of his efforts to bring about this peace plan. And of course, yes, it is still very early days. This is the early innings. This is just, day one, you could say, but a huge, huge moment, not just in Israel, but also for the region as a whole. And I would also say that over the course of the weekend, even when Special Envoy Steve Witkoff was addressing the Israeli public who were congregated in Hostage Square at Tel Aviv, he paid credit to the role of the mediators. He thanked them personally. He thanked the leaders of Qatar, of Egypt, and of Turkey for bringing about the outcome that we're seeing today. And this really just underscores how important a role the Trump administration believed that the Arab leaders did play. Rewind back to a month ago when the situation was very different, and we were here discussing that attack that took place on Doha when Israel were trying to take out senior Hamas officials. A couple of weeks later, you had that very seminal meeting on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly, President Trump meeting with those Arab leaders. A couple of days after that, putting out that 20-point peace plan. So here we are, and I think today is really just a recognition of all of the efforts and the diplomatic work that has taken place over the course of the last couple of years. That's not to say that all the problems are solved, but there has been a key role by these Arab leaders.
Of course, Jumana, this also releases an amount of humanitarian aid desperately needed in the Gaza Strip. What do we know about whether those trucks have already started filing in?
Absolutely. So the exchange of hostages for prisoners is underway, as we've been reporting throughout the course of the morning. But of course, over the past 24 hours or so, you've started to see the trickling back of some of that much needed humanitarian aid back into the Gaza Strip. The UN say that they're ready to send in about 180,000 metric tons of key supplies, be they medical, food, water, with the sole purpose of distributing them. And the availability of aid has never been an issue. What has been an issue has been the distribution, the dissemination of aid, and the fact that it hasn't been able to get inside the Gaza enclave. There are going to be discussions about the crossings, the reopening of the Rafah crossing, likely to happen in the next 24 hours as well, because from the Palestinian standpoint, of course, many of these displaced Palestinians have started the arduous journey of returning back to their homes, only to discover that their homes no longer exist. So part and parcel of the discussions later today are going to be addressing some of those longer-term issues about the reconstruction of Gaza. 90% of it is uninhabitable, the resumption of humanitarian aid, and ultimately what governance looks like, with the international community pushing for no role for Hamas in future governance.
Yeah, I mean, even just taking the rubble out is going to take a phenomenal amount of time. Jumana, tell us a little bit more about the different summits that are going on today. So several European leaders and leaders from around the world are traveling to Egypt. Explain to us who exactly is meeting where and for what purpose.
So all of these leaders will be congregating in Sharm el-Sheikh. The list of invitees has been extended to, globally. So you have representatives from Arab nations, some questions as to whether the Israeli Prime Minister himself may make an appearance, so stay tuned for that. Unsure at this point whether he himself may be there. Hamas officials will not be there, but the key mediators, we spoke about Egypt, Qatar, Turkey, representatives from those countries will be there. In addition, we found out a short while ago that the Saudi foreign minister will be representing, in addition to European leaders, the likes of the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, President Macron, who has invested a lot of political capital in this, especially being one of the countries to recognize Palestinian statehood on the sidelines of the UN a couple of weeks ago. And then in addition to that, you have these international bodies. You have the UN Secretary General who'll be attending, the European Council President Antonio Costa, and the Arab League Secretary General as well. So the purpose is to bring together all of these key stakeholders, not just who participated in getting us to where we are today, but who will have a vested interest and a role to play in some of these longer-term questions that need to be addressed still.
Jumana, thank you so much. We will be watching all of these developments in real time. That is Bloomberg Horizons anchor Jumana Bersecci. Meanwhile, over in Washington, the Trump administration signaled openness to a deal with China to ease fresh trade tensions. Vice President J.D. Vance spoke with Fox News yesterday.
It's going to be a delicate dance, and a lot of it is going to depend on how the Chinese respond. If they respond in a highly aggressive manner, I guarantee you the President of the United States has far more cards than the People's Republic of China. If, however, they're willing to be reasonable, then Donald Trump is always willing to be a reasonable negotiator.
And as we await the president addressing the Knesset, let us get to Bloomberg's Balazs Pence now. Balazs, I'm just curious as to all of the geopolitical questions that are out there and what we should be keeping in focus in terms of US markets, obviously, as we head into a week where we're only going to get soft data and we have this tit for tat with China as the president is taking a victory lap in Israel and we're in day 13 of a US government shutdown.
Yes, that's right. It's a very tricky time for markets. Vani, in terms of the trade relationship between the U.S. and China, there was a bit of a change in tone from the U.S. administration, and we see that change in tone in markets today as well. So Donald Trump said that he respects and admires President Xi of China. J.D. Vance urged the Chinese to remain reasonable in this negotiation, and what those comments do is they open up this little bit of space for negotiation. They open up these potential off-ramps as the two countries come off this this weekend where there was really an escalating rhetoric and this sort of specter of escalating trade measures between the two kind of reminded markets that they may have been too complacent when it comes to that trade relationship. So now as we get ready for the run-up for the meeting between Presidents Trump and Xi, there is more room for negotiation, and there are more deadlines to come. The U.S. Tariffs are supposed to kick in on November 1st. The Chinese measures a week later, and then in the middle of next month, there's the deadline for the current trade truce. So there might be a lot more negotiations. There might be a lot more voices coming in to influence markets when it comes to that very, very important trade relationship.
Now, interestingly, we did get some hard data. It was out of China, though, Balazs, and we saw shipments grow substantially at the fastest pace in 6 months. But they've been growing double digits, exports from China, for the last 6 months. And the last reading we have was that they were up 27%. Now, that's because China is replacing the US with some other countries, upping their exports to the European Union, but also the likes of Vietnam and so on. Does that give China more leverage?
Well, it certainly gives them more confidence that they're able to withstand tariffs in a way that maybe the U.S. might not have anticipated. It gives them confidence that they can find markets for those products that are being shut out of the U.S. When it comes to the Chinese economy, the overall picture is far from rosy. But the Chinese have always taken a longer-term view of this trade relationship, and they are very confident in their ability to withstand what they see as temporary short-term pain. They certainly think they have more capability of doing that than the U.S. And as we see after the big market sell-off on Friday, the U.S. changing its tone already, that probably gives the Chinese confidence that that is indeed the case, that they can be more resilient in this relationship than their counterpart.
Balazs, thank you so much for setting us up for the trading day. That is Balazs Pence. I want to return now to Jerusalem, Israel, where Oliver Crook is with us, and we're obviously waiting for President Trump to address the Knesset. He was invited to do so after it became clear that Hamas was going to release all remaining living hostages. They have now done so. And Ollie, the scenes were quite amazing. It was a bit of a split screen. The president was literally arriving at Ben Gurion Airport as the hostages were being driven onto Israeli soil. Quite the split screen.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, it's hard to really put into words the sort of emotional charge of a day like this for the Israeli public and for, many across the world who've been following the events within Israel for the last 2 years. For those who've watched since October 7th, the sort of impossibility, the equation of impossible diplomacy that sort of presented itself before the world over the last sort of 2 years, and then the sort of swift, sudden change within the last really week and a half from sort of Trump diplomatic efforts after all of these sort of incredible, unprecedented events, whether it was the United States bombing Iran in a sort of show of force and a show of solidarity with the Israelis that you really have not seen from any other American president, whether it was that failed attempt to kill some of the negotiators of Hamas by the Israelis within Qatar, all of these sort of destabilizing events that have culminated ultimately in something that was thought really impossible a couple of weeks ago. And as of this moment, Hamas currently has custody of 0 living Israeli hostages. And that has been one of the 2 goals of this war that was begun on October 7th by those attacks by Hamas and then waged brutally and intensely within the Gaza Strip. One of the aims was to return the hostages. The second aim, of course, of that war was to destroy Hamas, to disarm Hamas. And whether or not that aim will be achieved and how that aim will be achieved will be absolutely fundamental and crucial in trying to achieve the other phases of this 20-point plan. We can't really have any conversation about security within Gaza, any kind of conversation about governance within Gaza, and certainly no conversation about a sort of Palestinian state without first answering the question of what Hamas looks like going forward. I would like to just say just another thing that we're now getting confirmation from apparently the Egyptians. So initially this summit to be held in Sharm el-Sheikh, this peace summit chaired by Donald Trump and el-Sisi, the president of Egypt, with a number of different Arab leaders, was originally not going to be attended by Benjamin Netanyahu. We now understand that Netanyahu is likely to attend this summit in Egypt, which is a significant development. We also heard from local media here in Israel that the way that this happened, and again, we have not confirmed this ourselves, but what we've been hearing from reporting behind the scenes is that Donald Trump, made a call to the Egyptian president with Benjamin Netanyahu right there and basically negotiated that would be that his presence at this signing ceremony, which is of course significant to have a signing ceremony like this without the Israelis, but managing to get him in the room, again, speaks to another part of this sort of unconventional conventional Trump diplomacy, which managed to get us to where we are today.
Absolutely, and it was clear that there was very warm relations between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu when Netanyahu met him off the plane. And obviously it's been a fairly rocky relationship over the last several weeks and months. Bloomberg's Oliver Crook is staying with us. We are going to keep our eye on the Knesset and bring you that speech when it happens. First, though, to other top stories trending on the terminal this morning. U.S. President Donald Trump is considering sending Tomahawk long-range cruise missiles to Ukraine, saying it will provide a new step of aggression in its war with Russia. This follows a second phone call at the weekend between Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Companies ranging from State Street to Marex Group are expanding their outsourced trading businesses. State Street is opening a desk in Frankfurt and strengthening its presence in London while looking to grow in the Middle East. Financial services companies are continuing to widen their global footprint in a race for greater market share. Xiaomi shares fell the most since April after reports that one of its SU7 electric sedan stores failed to open after a fiery crash in the southwest Chinese city of Chengdu, trapping at least one person inside. The crash further raises questions over the safety of electronically operated car door handles. Now, President Emmanuel Macron has announced a new cabinet as pressure builds for him and his reappointed Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu to head off France's growing political crisis and pass a budget. Let's get more with Bloomberg's Caroline Conan in Paris. So, Caroline, he was given an extra 48 hours. Now he's been given a whole extra chance as Prime Minister. What can he bring to the table in terms of a budget that might appease anybody at this point?
It's kind of like the Groundhog Day movie where you feel like you're living the same day over and over again. As you mentioned, just a week ago, Lecornu was resigning as Prime Minister, then was given 48 hours by President Macron to try and come up with a solution. And then he was reappointed on Friday night at 10 p.m. French time, surprising everyone. And we had this cabinet again last night, slightly different from the one week ago, because this time all the presidential hopefuls such as Bruno Retailleau, former interior minister, have left the boat. You have a few unknown figures here, such as the head of the railway company SNCF or the prefect of police of Paris, entering the government, figures from civil society, because what Lecornu said is that he's coming back as out of duty in order to get a budget for France before the end of the year, but he doesn't want any presidential connections among the members of his cabinet. Tomorrow we're gonna have the first cabinet meeting after President Macron comes back from Egypt, and then tomorrow afternoon Lecornu will give finally his general policy speech that he was supposed to give already last week. We'll see how long this Lecornu II government can last.
Yeah, the OAT bond spread back above 84 basis points now. Look, what is the incentive for any other political party to go along with this? Macron is clearly, pushing their buttons here.
And President Macron was actually speaking in Egypt just an hour ago, saying that we need to finally bring the image of France of stability and strength, which is obviously not something we have seen over the past months or even the past year since he called snap elections in June 2024, creating this whole instability. Now, it seems like the tone of the opposition parties seem to have slightly changed over the past week, and this shock resignation last Monday, with the socialists saying that if they see a suspension of the pension reform in Lecornu's speech tomorrow, then they might refrain from toppling this Lecornu II government. However, he will still face 2 votes of no confidence proposed by the far left and the far right as soon as this week.
So there will be a budget, is that what you're saying, Caroline? And I mean, the market is still being fairly sanguine about this whole thing, I would say. We haven't seen a massive blow up anywhere, but at some point you would expect that, right?
I would say the chances of getting a budget before the end of the year has increased compared to last week. I would give it like a 75% chance, whereas last week was more like 50-50. Clearly, the parliament is still fragmented. This may be, again, President Macron's last chance before calling snap elections. And of course, this idea of suspending the pension reform will have an impact on the budget, but for many economists and analysts, the impact may be less significant than having another political crisis in France and another snap election.
Absolutely. We'll continue to follow with bated breath. Caroline, thank you so much. That is Bloomberg's Caroline Conan in Paris. Time now for your front page news. One story making headlines across the major news outlets. It's the story we're all watching at this hour. Hamas has freed all remaining living Israeli hostages being held in the Gaza Strip. President Trump is in Israel to herald the agreement. He's about to speak before the Knesset. Then he travels to Egypt for a signing ceremony on the Gaza plan. The ceasefire deal was secured after days of indirect negotiations brokered by the US, Egypt, Qatar and Turkey on the terms of a 20-point plan put forward by Trump. And I do want to mention that you're looking at live pictures right there of the Knesset in Jerusalem, Israel. President Trump is about to speak. He arrived a couple of hours ago at Ben Gurion Airport just as the hostages were being driven onto Israeli soil. And we are seeing the Bloomberg Israel Index up about 0.4% as it is trading right now. Let's take a look at some U.S. assets because we're in for a big day, it looks like, in the United States as well, with futures set to rebound strongly, at least at this hour, on the S&P and the Nasdaq 100, which, by the way, dropped 3.5% Friday, if you don't recall. We have the euro weaker today. It is below 116 now, so deteriorating there. A stronger dollar, of course. We're going to be speaking with Jordan Rochester of Mizuho Bank in just a few minutes, and he'll tell us more about all of that. This is Bloomberg. It's 5:30 a.m. in New York City. Good morning, I'm Bonnie Quinn with your Bloomberg Brief. Here's what you need to know. Stock futures showing a big bounce back after the S&P 500 suffered its biggest decline Friday since April. This as the White House tempers trade threats against China. And President Trump is in Israel right now as Hamas has released all remaining living Israeli hostages held in the Gaza Strip. The president about to address the Knesset. Will bring you those remarks as soon as he begins. So let's take a look at these markets now. Obviously, the bond market is closed for the holiday, but we have S&P and Nasdaq futures looking to see the market roar back today. The Nasdaq 100 was down 3.5% on Friday. Potentially a great day for the Russell 2000 as well. This all as President Trump talked about November 1st being an eternity away, and also mentioning how he really feels warmly towards Xi Jinping. And so it looks like the market is perhaps putting the potential of an escalating trade war on the back foot, at least for this Monday. Let's take a look at the next board because we did see a 10 basis point decline across the curve in the yield curve on Friday. So we're obviously not trading today for the holiday. The bond market is closed, but we're at 403.22 right now. We started Friday above 413. The VIX got all the way above 23. It's back down to 19.5, so not at the levels we were on Thursday, but it is coming down. Gold, though, continuing to rise, 4,071, and Bitcoin did that round trip. It is back now above 115,000 a coin. Let's get to some individual stocks to watch now with Valerie Teitel in London. Valerie.
Good morning, Ivani. Let's start with a check on these American rare earth miners. They're absolutely flying in pre-market trade. USA Rare Earths up nearly 25%, critical metals up over 20%, and MP Materials up some 11% so far in pre-market trade. Perhaps this is the market assuming that China is not going to backtrack on those rare earth export controls, and perhaps the U.S. government will have a bit more urgency and a bit more aggressiveness when it comes to using equity stakes in order to combat China's dominance dominance in rare earth mining. Next, let's have a check on the tech sector. As you mentioned, we are seeing the NASDAQ rebound very strongly, as well as the Mag 7 stocks. Leading those gains is NVIDIA, up 3.5% so far in pre-market trade. This stock did decline nearly 5% on Friday, so wiping out a lot of those losses with this pre-market move higher, up 3.5% for NVIDIA. Next, let's check on some ratings moves. We had an upgrade from Goldman on Estee Lauder. The beauty company is rising near 5% in pre-market trade. Looks to be a good session for this company. Goldman citing the fact that they could return to sales growth in the quarter of September, and also are going to be having some nicer trends to be confronting when it comes to China, one of their key growth segments. Funny?
Valerie, thank you so much. Valerie Titel there in London. So the dollar is strengthening once again today. We're seeing particular weakness in the euro. It's headed for 116, a sharp move for the US yield curve Friday too, during that so-called volatility pothole, sending the 10-year down to 4.03%, the 2-year to 350. Do we see the same reversal tomorrow when we start trading in the bond market again that we're seeing in equities? Let's ask our next guest, Jordan Rochester, head of FICC strategy at Mizuho Bank. So Jordan, was this a one-day move for the bond market, or is it taking threats of an escalation here with China more seriously than potentially equities are?
Well, I think the bond market has got a few things going on. There's also the situation for politics in France, the politics in Japan, the politics in the US. It's not just about the trade talks, but of course, Friday was a big wake-up call for equity markets and risk sentiment as a whole. We've rallied significantly into that event as well, so it caught a lot of people out being shortchanged by essentially hedges hadn't been built up significantly enough. But I think the sort of taco trade applies here. I mean, we've already seen the olive branch being offered to China. The key thing is that the talks between the US, President Xi and Trump's meeting at the APEC summit is still scheduled, because that was part of the threat as well on Friday, that would be cancelled, and that really would be a big step back in the geopolitics. But this morning you have seen European fixed income kind of try to sell off and sort of enjoy a bit of risk on, in terms of the equity market. But it's rallied back a bit in terms of fixed income in Europe. Perhaps it's the French political uncertainty. It doesn't help that we don't have an open US market to really judge it, because what really moves global fixed income is the US Treasury bond curve. So when we find out tomorrow, when Columbus Day is over, that'll be the real test.
Yeah, the dollar is strengthening once again today. The euro obviously headed for 116, as we said. You know, how much is this consensus trade at risk? Could we see some kind of a squeeze here, and could that rock the markets?
I think it's a real big test of this consensus trade. If you go to any client investor presentation for the past 6 months, especially since Liberation Day, it's been short the dollar. And you see that in pretty much all of the positioning data as well. In the FX options market, for quite a long time, you saw demand for dollar hedging outstrip demand for the euro hedging. It's quite a rare thing to see. It's similar, but less so in the yen. Now we're seeing a little bit of a flip of that, because yes, Friday woke us up with this trade talks taking a dive lower. You saw dollar weakness, but it wasn't really that significant compared to what it was in Liberation Day. The reason for that is because everybody is already short the dollar. Meanwhile, if we take a step back from the geopolitics and look at the economic cycles, for me, for a long time, we've had this outperformance in European surveys. That is starting to lose its shine. We're seeing the PMIs, the ZEWs, the IFOs out of Germany and the euro area. The new export orders are starting to show signs of cracks from tariffs. Meanwhile, in the US, if you're a US consumer, it's been a fantastic time. You've got a wealth effect from your equity portfolio being relatively high. It's still near the historical highs even after the sell-off. You've got very low sort of front-end rates, and your mortgage rates for the long end have come down too. So we might see the US consumer step back in and boost economic growth in the US at a time when Europe looks to be faltering. So we might see the dollar bounce back in the short term.
I just want to mention we're getting some excerpts from what President Trump is going to say to the Knesset, and that's what you're seeing on your screen now. But Jordan, we're in a data desert. We may get the CPI, but not until next week. You know, BLS staff have been called back in order to put something together for October 24th. We do have some soft data this week, though. Is that going to be enough to give the Fed visibility for what to do at the end of October?
I think the Fed's pretty much on autopilot for a rate cut at the next meeting. You'd need to have some crazy NFIB survey to change the story on that, or or indeed a very, very hot CPI, and we can talk about that as well. The alternative data is fantastic. It helps us predict what the official data, which is currently in shutdown, will do. But the problem is it's called the Rashomon effect. There's so many variants of alternative data that give completely conflicting signals. The ADP is probably the one that the market will lean on the most. We saw that the other week. We had negative payroll growth. But the NFIB, which is a long-running survey, goes back to 1970s, suggests that hiring plans are rising. So which one do you use? I think the market will put more weight on the ADP. Its correlation with NFP is higher. But let's talk about that CPI next week or whenever it does come out. It's expected to be a hot one, especially for headline CPI. The TIPS curve, that's the Treasury Inflation Protected Securities, is expecting 0.5%, roughly speaking, for month-on-month CPI. So that's going to be a big number. Where does year-on-year inflation get to is the big question, and it's going to get to 3.4, 3.5% by around April next year. So I think what economists got wrong about tariffs is how quickly they will feed through to the economy in CPI. But I think what they probably will be right about is they will feed through. Just it takes a bit of time. We're talking next April when we're going to see the peak of that impact.
Well, and also, you have to wonder if the US-China trade is a 50-50 trade. I mean, is it 50-50 that extra 100% tariffs go on, or is it something different? And how would an extra tariff impact the US down the road? And also the fact that we're, going into day 14 tomorrow when the president returns of a government shutdown, Jordan. I mean, how does the market balance all of these risks?
It's difficult. When it comes to the trade talks, Scott Bessent summed it up. Essentially, when we got to 145%, that was close to a de facto trade embargo. The rare earth minerals, though, they are a crucial part of the supply chain that China is dominant in. They're not actually that rare. You can find them around the world and mine them if you want to, but there's not many mines open, and they're mostly in China if they are. And it's actually the refinery part that is very costly in terms of the environment. So it's mostly in China too. If that is something that is a chip that China plays and Trump keeps escalating, that is something markets need to take note of, because that means supplies of consumer products, when it comes to electronics, supplies of military products that all use these sort of magnets will really struggle. And we could see a big inflationary wave from the back of that. I just don't think we're going to get there. That's because of the olive branch being offered by the US already by Trump in his tweets, and from big business saying, no, we really need this to stay open. So this is a long-term strategic problem for the world relying on one supplier, but it's definitely a strong part that China has. But I think the markets will rely on TACO, and they won't be looking at this as a major risk that's going to escalate from here.
I wonder about the euro as well, Jordan. Like, we're looking at 116 now at this point. I mean, is the ECB looking at this level and wondering if maybe it should move a little faster?
They're not looking for it to move either way, is what they would say. They would give that sort of neutral stance. But they have commented on the strength of the euro being a problem for inflation. If we get to 120, 125, which I think we could do next year with thanks to the German fiscal stimulus coming through and the Fed cuts, then that becomes an issue for the ECB. And we've got them cutting rates once more. I think they're going to skip December. I think that it's very difficult for them to cut rates in the short term. Their sort of mandate is being achieved at 2%, roughly speaking, for the past few months in CPI. Their forecast already expect a dip, but to recover back to 2. But I think by March, they'll be challenged by the currency strength, but also by the slowdown in surveys and the impact of tariffs feeding through as well. So we've got one more cut from them, which takes them to 175, which is the lower end of neutral. To go beyond that, we need to see a really big bad news in the growth outlook. And that's really difficult, given the German fiscal that's going to come through.
All right, Jordan, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Jordan Rochester there of Mizuho Bank. Now to other top stories trending on the terminal this morning. French President Emmanuel Macron has announced a new cabinet as pressure builds for him and his reappointed Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu to head off France's growing political crisis and pass a budget. The cabinet will meet for the first time tomorrow, where Lecornu is expected to propose the budget. Jefferies defends its dealings with First Brands, saying its exposure to the bankrupt auto parts supplier was small. The investment bank is seeking to revive investor confidence after a sharp sell-off in its stock. Shares have tumbled in recent weeks and are down around 35% on the year. Economists marked up their estimates for US economic growth this year and next, though job growth is expected to remain weak. According to a survey from the National Association for Business Economics, the inflation-adjusted gross domestic product is rising 1.8 this year, up from the 1.3% forecasters had expected back in June. Coming up, the Trump administration signals openness to a deal with China. More on U.S.-China trade tensions, and we'll bring you President Trump's remarks to the Knesset next. This is Bloomberg.
It's going to be a delicate dance. And a lot of it is going to depend on how the Chinese respond. If they respond in a highly aggressive manner, I guarantee you the President of the United States has far more cards than the People's Republic of China. If, however, they're willing to be reasonable, then Donald Trump is always willing to be a reasonable negotiator.
Vice President J.D. Vance speaking on Fox News after the Trump administration opened the door to a deal with China. Joining us now is Bloomberg's Kasia Klimashinska. Open the door is one way of putting it, sort of walking back some of those dire comments might be another. Kasia, is it more likely now that, we won't see that 100% tariff going into effect? Trump talking about November 1st being an eternity away and talking about the warm relations he had with Xi?
Exactly. So it all started on Friday when President Trump put out 2 truth socials threatening massive tariffs on China. He later specified those tariffs would be as high as 100% and that the U.S. would also stop exports of some of its critical software. That unleashed a sell-off in stocks with S&P 500 down 2.7% on Friday, and oil and cryptocurrencies also selling off, and that led to this damage control from both U.S. and China over the weekend, with both sides coming out and signaling that they are willing to negotiate, and President Trump specifically telling reporters that, look, those new tariffs would not go into effect until November 1st, and there is a lot of time between now and the beginning of the next month. So clearly the two sides hope to negotiate, and that's also what the Wall Street is expecting. Goldman Sachs put out a note saying that it is very likely that the two sides will continue talking, and so they will not reach for those most outrageous three-digit tariffs, but also there is this tail risk that it could happen.
President Trump also said he'd consider arming Ukraine with long-range Tomahawk missiles that would allow strikes deeper into Russia. Let's just have a listen first, Kasia.
I might say, look, if this war's not going to get settled, I'm going to send them Tomahawks. I may say that. The Tomahawk is an incredible weapon, very offensive weapon. And honestly, Russia does not need that.
How close are we to something like that happening?
President Trump had 2 conversations with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky over the weekend. That's fairly rare. The two don't have that strong of a relationship. And after that, as we saw, Trump spoke to reporters and he said he is considering maybe sending those long-range missiles, but he does see it as major escalation, so he wants to talk to President Putin before. Trump hopes to use this momentum that he has from the Middle East when he achieved a great diplomatic success. He clearly looks to accomplish something similar here in Ukraine and get the two sides to talk and reach some sort of a ceasefire.
Kasia, thank you so much. That is Bloomberg's Kasia Klimashinska. We want to bring you back now to Jerusalem. We're still awaiting President Trump's address to the Knesset. That's going to happen in just a few minutes. Members have gathered and it's been called into session. But let's get to Bloomberg's Oliver Crook, who's outside the Old City in Jerusalem. Oliver, we do have some of the headlines. We got some excerpts of what President Trump is going to say. Can you fill us in?
Yeah, so what we're expecting from President Trump, is a really sort of really marking the moment, I think. And I think in sort of grand Trump fashion, really sort of trying to express in some way how enormous an event this is and really taking credit for it. And I think that, for all of the criticisms that can exist of Donald Trump and the many critics of them, this is one for which he deserves all the credit that he will be claiming for it. This is this deal that seemed really inconceivable even 2 weeks ago. And I think that before the Knesset, he will find an audience that will be in total accord with that perspective on things. And I mean, as we've been talking about, Vani, even arriving within Israel, even before the wheels of the plane hit the runway, I was looking out the window. You could see a skyscraper illuminated with the Israeli flag, the American flag, and underneath it reading, "Thank you." And those roads, the same road that Donald Trump will have taken from the Tel Aviv airport to come here to Jerusalem, usually lined with Israeli flags. Every third flag is an American flag. And that is going to be one of the messages that is going to be sent to the Israeli parliament. And despite despite the support that Joe Biden gave in the early days of the war to Israel, and we remember when he came here right after October 7th, the warm reception he got, Trump is seen as somebody who has been a much even greater ally to the Israeli people, to the degree that he has been willing to, for example, strike Iran. This is something that is kind of inconceivable, I think, for an American president to go quite that far. And that was part of, I think, the sort of fluid, some would say very unconventional foreign diplomacy that the United States has embodied that has got us to this point, a willingness to do that, a willingness to demonstrate how far their sort of support of Israel would go. And with that, a credibility that allowed President Trump to put pressure when pressure was required onto Benjamin Netanyahu to agree to this deal. And we should say on part of that pressure, we're getting now just some headlines crossing that after all the hostages that have now been released, that are all now in sort of Israeli hands from that side, we are now getting the releases of the Palestinian prisoners, which is the next step of this process. We now understand that they are being released into custody back to the sort of Palestinian side of things. And this is going to be sort of the process that is going to be ongoing over the next few hours, which will then lead, of course, to that big summit in Egypt a little bit later, where we understand now Benjamin Netanyahu, and we understand again from some of the local media reporting, after a call that Trump made to the president of Egypt while Benjamin Netanyahu was with him, now it seems the Israelis in the form of Benjamin Netanyahu will travel to Egypt, which is not entirely unprecedented, but quite uncommon, and a really sort of an attempt by the Trump administration to show full unity. And remember, we also had some other news outlets reporting that even the Iranians had been invited to attend this session. So again, some of this very unconventional foreign policy from the Trump administration, which has led us to a day that we really couldn't have foreseen even 2 weeks ago.
Yes, and just to reiterate what you said there, we are getting confirmation that the first bus of Palestinian prisoners has arrived in the West Bank. So obviously, with as many as 2,000 being released, it will take some time to get all of the Palestinian prisoners out of the prisons. But we do have all of the remaining alive hostages back on Israeli soil and being tended to by dedicated medical teams for each hostage. And we know that all the hostages were able to walk, so we know that they were in some condition. We also know that the summit in Egypt is going to at least try to begin to address phase 2, no doubt, Ollie, right? What can we expect to see and hear out of this summit in Egypt as regards the next steps, which are going to be crucial in order for this peace process to hold?
Yeah, Vani, I don't even know sort of which questions to begin asking because there are just so many of them. I mean, if we want to step all the way back and look at the sort of fullness of the ambition of the 20-point plan, I think for the Trump administration, really what the ultimate goal is a sort of reestablishment of momentum behind the Abraham Accords to have really sort of a harmonious relationship in the Middle East. This was seen as a sort of big development of his first administration, and I think that is ultimately his goal. There was even talk about, a Palestinian statehood and autonomy within the very end of that sort of 20-point plan. But in these sort of foothills, which is where we are right now, there are many questions to be answered. The first is going to be, what does a security arrangement looks like within the Gaza Strip? We've been talking about this international stabilization force. What will that look like? What militaries will be involved? And who really wants to front such a force? Because this is a force that needs to be both credible with the Israelis in the sense that they can furnish Israel with the security that they demand, and of course with the Palestinians who want this to be a legitimate enterprise and not just sort of a puppet of the United States and the Israelis. There is the question of the technocratic sort of Palestinian-led regime that is overseen by this sort of oversight board chaired by Donald Trump and potentially Tony Blair. And those are many of the conversations, and those are conversations that can't even begin until we understand what the role of Hamas is going to be going forward and if they're willing to put their guns down. Absolutely.
Ollie, thank you so much. Oliver Crook there in Jerusalem. And I do want to mention you can follow along on our T-Live blog, TLIV blog, for all of the updates there. Coming up, earnings season kicking back off already. We'll get you set for your trading week next. This is Bloomberg. President Donald Trump about to address the Israeli Knesset right now, as you can see, being greeted by the Prime Minister and by members of the Israeli Parliament after all of the living remaining hostages have been delivered over to the Israelis and are on Israeli soil and being taken care of. We are to understand that he's going to hail, quote, the historic dawn of a new Middle East. And he's obviously going to be traveling to Sharm el-Sheikh a little bit later on for a peace summit. Benjamin Netanyahu is actually going to attend that signing summit as well later on, as well as a raft of other leaders from around the world. But once again, do follow along on our T-Live blog as President Donald Trump addresses the Israeli Knesset. That's it for Bloomberg Brief. Surveillance is ahead. This is Bloomberg.